My name is Rachel Miller. I just turned 18 and I always believed my dad's promise that the college fund he saved for me was untouchable. It was supposed to be proof that no matter how strict he was, he still wanted my future secure. But one morning, with nothing more than a clipped message on my phone that promise shattered, he froze the account. He said I would only see $1 of it again if I apologized for being disrespectful. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about money at all. It was about control. And what followed turned an ordinary birthday into a battle that shook my family. Would you give in to keep the peace? Or would you risk losing everything to finally stand up for yourself? Stay with me because the choice I made changed more than just one night. Let me take you back to where it began. I was still in my robe when the message came through coffee cup halfway to my lips. The steam had already faded, and the kitchen clock ticked louder than it should have for a Thursday morning. My phone buzzed across the counter, and I glanced at the screen, expecting some reminder about the grocery order or maybe a text from Sophie. Instead, I saw my dad's name. The words were short-clipped like a business memo. The college fund is frozen. You will have access when you apologize for being disrespectful. I read it once, then again. My hands trembled just slightly, and a drop of coffee spilled over the rim onto the counter. For a moment I thought it had to be a joke. My dad had been saving that money since I started high school. He liked to brag about it at family barbecues. College was his investment, his proof of being a responsible father, and now he had turned it into a leash. I whispered it out loud, barely above a breath. He froze it. The back door creaked, and Mom came in from the yard, still holding a pair of gardening gloves. She saw my face and stopped, her voice soft. What happened? I slid the phone across the counter. She pulled it closer, squinted and sighed in that heavy way I had known since childhood. Rachel, just say you're sorry. Sorry for what? Her lips pressed together as if the answer were obvious. Last weekend. You snapped at him during dinner, remember? I remembered. He had criticized my decision to apply to schools out of state, saying I should stay close so he could keep an eye on me. I told him I was old enough to make my own choices. My voice had been sharp, I'll admit, but I had not cursed, I had not yelled. I had simply refused to nod along. Mom peeled off her gloves and set them on the counter. It is not worth losing your college fund over. You know your father, he holds grudges. Just smooth it over, say the words, get the money back. I gripped the edge of the counter, the wood biting into my palms. So I have to grovel just to go to school. Her tone lifted in false brightness like she was soothing a child. It is only an apology. No, it is not only an apology. It is my future, and he is dangling it like a prize for obedience. The silence that followed was heavy. Mom busied herself with rinsing her gloves in the sink. I could hear the water rushing, the clink of ceramic. My chest felt tight but steady, like something had shifted inside me and locked into place. The phone buzzed again. Another message. Party Saturday night at the Riverbend Steakhouse. Guests confirmed. See you there. I stared at the screen. Mom peeked over my shoulder. He is planning a birthday dinner for you, she said carefully. A big one. Family, his coworkers. Of course, he island. I let the phone drop onto the counter. He thinks if he throws a party, I will show up, smile, say I am sorry, and pretend everything is fine. Mom wiped her hands on a dish towel. Maybe you should. I turned to face her. Maybe I should sell my soul for steak and balloons. Her eyes darted away. She hated confrontation, always had. I almost felt guilty for the edge in my voice. But then, I thought about the number on that account, $65,000, all those years of planning, and how easily he had twisted it into a weapon. I walked into the living room where the morning news droned on from the television. The words of the anchorwoman blurred in the background. I sank into the couch, phone still in my hand, staring at that message like it could burn a hole through my skin. The fund was never really mine, I realized. It was his tool, his proof, that he still controlled the rules even as I turned 18. And now he wanted to make an example out of me in front of relatives, in front of colleagues at a party meant to showcase his generosity. I leaned back and closed my eyes. For the first time, the thought came sharp and clear. What if I did not go? The idea settled over me like a blanket, both terrifying and strangely comforting. The sound of Mom's footsteps moved down the hall. She called back softly. Just think about it, Rachel. Do not throw away everything over pride. I opened my eyes and watched the ceiling fan spin. Pride. That was the word they always used when I refused to bow my head. But in that quiet room with the smell of coffee still hanging in the air, it did not feel like pride. It felt like survival. I picked up the phone again, looked at the screen one more time, and then pressed the button to lock it. The message disappeared into black glass. I sat there in the stillness, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, my heart beating louder than both, and I knew something had already changed. I remembered another morning long ago, different kitchen, same knot in my stomach. I must have been 12. My father had promised we would all go to Disneyland that summer if my grades stayed perfect. I came home with 1 B in math, just 1, and I can still see the way he folded the paper, pressed his thumb into the crease, and told me the trip was off. My little cousins went. My sister went. I stayed behind with Grandma Evelyn, watching their photos arrive in the mail. Dad called it discipline, but to me it was humiliation. Sitting there now at 18, I realized nothing had changed. Money had always been his favorite weapon. Vacations, gifts, even small things like ice cream outings depended on me being the daughter he wanted. If I questioned him, if I pushed back even slightly, the punishment came swift and cold. Grandma Evelyn had been my refuge back then. When everyone else packed for the trip, she took me to the farmer's market in Salem and bought me a sunflower taller than I was. We ate peach pie on her porch, and she told me stories about her own strict father, how she once ran away for a whole day just to make him notice her. She laughed when she said it, but her eyes looked sad. She told me it was not pride to want respect, it was dignity. The refrigerator hummed steady behind me while that memory replayed in sharp detail. My chest tightened as if my younger self were still sitting there waiting for someone to say she was enough. My phone buzzed again. A notification from social media. My dad had already posted about the upcoming birthday dinner. A glossy photo of the restaurant Riverbend Steakhouse captioned with big words about celebrating milestones and family pride. People had commented congratulations. Some wrote about how lucky I must feel. I stared at the screen until it blurred. Mom peeked into the room, wiping her hands on a towel. She saw me looking and said gently, "He just wants to show you off." I let out a hollow laugh. Show me off like a prize pony. Her face pinched, and for once she did not argue. She just lowered herself into the chair across from me. "Do you remember when he opened that account?" she asked softly. "You were 14. He came home from the bank with all the paperwork, talking about how one day you would thank him." I remembered. He had lined us up in the living room, spread the papers on the coffee table, and lectured about compound interest like it was scripture. At the end, he handed me a folder with my name written across it. He said, "As long as you obey, your future is secure." I remember feeling proud for half a second, like I had just been handed a key to something important, until I realized it was a lock. Mom shifted in her seat, lowering her voice. "He believes rules make us strong. That is how he was raised." I looked at her, really looked. She had lines around her mouth that had deepened in recent years, like each sigh had carved its mark. "Did you ever get tired of following his rules?" I asked. She blinked. "Sometimes, but it was easier to keep the peace." Her answer was a punch to the gut. Keeping the peace had cost me trips, birthday parties, even small joys like being allowed to choose my own classes without a lecture. Now it was costing me my education. I stood and walked to the window. Rain streaked the glass, soft and steady like Oregon rain always did. Outside, the maple tree bent in the wind. I whispered more to myself than to her. "I cannot do this anymore." Her chair scraped against the floor. "Rachel, please think carefully. He is stubborn, but he is still your father." I turned back. "And I am still his daughter. Shouldn't that be enough?" She did not answer. She pressed the towel to her lips as if to keep the words inside. The memory of Disneyland pressed harder, sharper. how I had packed my backpack weeks in advance with sunscreen and a disposable camera, how I had tried to convince him that 1B was not the end of the world. He had stared through me like I was nothing but numbers on a grade sheet. I remembered sitting on Grandma's porch eating pie while everyone else laughed on rides without me. That same hollow ache was rising again, only this time I was old enough to see it for what it was. Dad was not teaching me discipline, he was teaching me obedience. I sank back onto the couch, my hands clasped tight in my lap. My phone buzzed yet again. Another message, this time from my sister, reminding me about a dress fitting she thought I would need for Saturday night. As if it was already decided that I would show up and play my part. I stared at the message until my vision blurred. Then I closed the phone and set it face down on the table. The refrigerator kept humming, the rain kept falling, and somewhere deep inside a line had been crossed. I was not going back. Not this time. The next morning, the smell of bacon filled the kitchen, but it did nothing to soften the tension. Mom had set the table like it was any other Friday plate, stacked orange juice poured, but her eyes flicked toward me every few seconds. She cleared her throat and tried to sound casual. Your father called from the office. He wants everything ready for Saturday. I stabbed at my eggs with the fork. Ready for what? She hesitated, then forced a smile that did not reach her eyes. The dinner. Your birthday dinner. He has already confirmed with the Riverbend Steakhouse. Private room, full menu, cake, the works. He says it is going to be unforgettable. Unforgettable, I repeated, tasting the bitterness of the word. He expects me to sit at the center table, bow my head, and give him exactly what he wants. Mom put down her fork and folded her napkin with careful precision. Rachel, I am asking you just for one evening, try to see the bigger picture. He has invited his partners, his boss people who matter to his career. If you do not show, it will be humiliating. I laughed without humor. So my presence is about his reputation, not my birthday. Her cheeks flushed. That is not fair. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the floor. What is not fair is being told my future depends on saying sorry for speaking my mind. The silence after my words rang louder than any argument. She looked down at her plate, shoulders, tight lips pressed thin. The phone buzzed on the counter. I reached for it and saw a group text already forming. Dad had written a cheery message full of exclamation points about how excited he was for Saturday night. Photos of the menu, a snapshot of the steakhouse exterior, even a note about the live pianist. Beneath it, relatives chimed in with hearts and congratulations. I typed nothing. I could almost see him sitting in his office typing it all out with a smug grin, imagining me reading it and folding under the pressure. I spent the afternoon pacing my room, glancing at the suitcase in the corner that I had not unpacked since our last trip to Seattle. The thought crossed my mind to pack again to escape somewhere, anywhere. But I knew running away was not the point this time. The point was to stand still and refuse to be moved. Later that evening, Mom knocked on my door. She leaned against the frame, looking smaller than I remembered. He thinks you will come, she said softly. He is convinced you will walk in smiling. I met her eyes. Then he does not know me as well as he thinks. She shook her head slowly. You are making this bigger than it needs to be. No, I said firmly. He is the one making it bigger. He froze my college fund, Mom. He is parading me like a trophy in front of people I barely know. That is not love, it is control. Her face twisted with something between shame and resignation. You do not understand what it is like to be married to him. Maybe not, I answered. But I do understand what it is like to be raised by him. She left without another word, the hallway light catching the tired slope of her shoulders. Saturday came faster than I wanted. The house buzzed with activity all morning. Mom baked cookies to bring as party favors. My sister Julia tried on dresses in the mirror, giggling on FaceTime with her friends about the big night. I stayed in my room, headphones on, staring at the clock as the minutes dragged. Around 5, Mom knocked again. Rachel, start getting ready. The car will leave in an hour. I pulled the headphones off and turned slowly. I am not going. Her face drained of color. Do not say that. Not now. I stood, my legs steady beneath me. I am not going to stand in that room and let him use me as a prop. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "If you do not show, he will be furious. He will never forgive you." I felt the words rise before I could stop them. Maybe I do not need his forgiveness anymore. She flinched like I had slapped her. For a moment I thought she would argue, but instead she simply looked at me with eyes full of sorrow and turned to leave. When the front door finally slammed and the sound of their car faded down the street, the house fell silent. I stood in the middle of my room listening to the quiet, my heart thudding with both fear and relief. The steakhouse lights were waiting across town, the guests filling their seats, the piano playing softly in the background. My chair at the center table would remain empty. I pulled the curtains shut, switched off the lamp, and sat cross-legged on the bed. The phone vibrated with incoming messages, but I ignored them. For the first time in years, I chose not to perform. Outside, the evening deepened into dusk. I breathed slowly, letting the stillness wrap around me, knowing every minute that passed at that party was one more minute I was reclaiming for myself. The next day, the rain finally stopped, leaving the streets slick and shining under a weak Oregon Sunday. I needed to get out of the house, away from the echoes of last night, so I walked downtown and slipped into the small coffee shop near campus where Sophie worked part-time. The bell above the door jingled as I pushed it open, and the smell of espresso wrapped around me like a blanket. Sophie spotted me, instantly tugging off her apron and waving me to our usual table by the window. She dropped into the seat across from me, her hair pulled into a messy bun, and studied my face. "You didn't go, did you?" I shook my head, my fingers curling around the paper cup she had slid in front of me. "No, I stayed home." Her eyes lit with something between pride and relief. "Good. I was worried you'd fold at the last minute." I let out a small laugh, though it sounded tired even to me. "My mom tried, she begged me, but I couldn't do it." Sophie leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Rachel, you realize what you did last night was huge. He set the stage expecting you to play your part, and you refused. That is power." I sipped the coffee, the heat filling my chest. It didn't feel like power in the moment. It felt terrifying. "Of course it did," she said. "Standing up to someone who has always held the purse strings is terrifying. But you did it." The shop door opened and closed behind us as people came and went, their voices a soft hum. For a moment, I let myself imagine they were all just extras in a movie about someone else's family, someone else's drama. Sophie tapped her finger against the table. "So what now?" I looked out the window where puddles reflected strips of blue sky. "I don't know. He still controls the account. He can still make this miserable." She tilted her head, studying me. "Do you want to keep living like that?" "No," I whispered. "I want to breathe without asking permission." Her lips curved into a determined smile. "Then maybe it's time you stop treating his money like the only option." The words settled in my chest, heavy and real. I had spent years believing that fund was my lifeline, but maybe it was only a chain. We sat quietly for a moment until Sophie nudged me with her elbow. "You know you're stronger than you think." The bell over the door rang again, and a group of students came in, laughing, their backpacks dripping with rain. I felt a pang watching them, free and careless, while I carried the weight of a family that measured love in dollar signs. Sophie noticed the look on my face. "Don't envy them," she said. "You're writing a different story." I smiled, faintly grateful for her stubborn faith. Later that afternoon, we walked together along the riverfront. The air smelled clean after the storm, and the water moved fast beneath the bridge. Sophie linked her arm through mine. "Remember when we were 14 and we swore we'd never turn into our mothers?" I laughed. "I remember," she grinned. "You're keeping that promise." The breeze lifted my hair, and for the first time in days my shoulders relaxed. Being with her reminded me I wasn't crazy for wanting something different. I wasn't selfish for refusing to play the obedient daughter forever. As the sun dipped lower, Sophie squeezed my arm. "Whatever happens next, you've got me." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. "That means more than you know." When I finally headed home, the house was dark except for a single lamp in the living room. Mom sat on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, eyes red like she had been crying. She looked up as I dropped my bag by the door. "How was your day?" she asked quietly. "Fine," I said, keeping my voice steady. I saw Sophie. She nodded but didn't look at me. Your father is furious. I expected as much. Her eyes flicked toward mine, pleading. He feels humiliated. Everyone asked where you were. I set my jaw. That was his choice, not mine. She let out a shaky breath. He says you've embarrassed him. I sat down in the chair across from her. Maybe it's time he felt what it's like. The clock ticked on the wall, each second stretching between us. Finally, she whispered, I don't know how to protect you from this. You don't have to, I said softly. I'll protect myself. Her eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. I stood and went upstairs, my heart pounding. In my room, I pulled out my journal, the one Grandma Evelyn had given me years ago. The cover was worn, the pages filled with fragments of thoughts and dreams. I wrote down one sentence, pressing hard enough that the pen nearly tore the paper. I will not be bought. The house was quiet, heavy, with the weight of everything unsaid. I set the pen down, lay back on the bed, and closed my eyes. For the first time in a long while, I felt the faint spark of freedom flicker inside me. Small but steady, waiting to grow. Daniel showed up at my door that Sunday afternoon with a paper bag of groceries in one hand and his old guitar case slung over his shoulder. He barely waited for me to answer before stepping inside, his eyes scanning my face like he already knew something was wrong. I tried to smile, but it came out thin. He set the bag on the counter and reached out, brushing my cheek with his thumb. You look like you haven't slept. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I didn't go to the party. His mouth curved, not in surprise but in quiet approval. Good. I dropped onto the couch and watched as he unpacked the bag. Apples, bread, peanut butter, a carton of eggs. Simple things. Things that felt grounding. He pulled out a jar of honey and held it up. Remember when we lived on this in Seattle? I laughed softly. We practically survived on honey toast. He sat beside me close enough that our shoulders touched. Your mom called me last night. My stomach tightened. What did she say? She asked me to talk some sense into you. His eyes softened. She thinks I can convince you to apologize. I stared at the carpet, tracing the pattern with my eyes. And what did you say? He lifted my hand into his fingers, warm and steady. I told her I wasn't in the business of teaching you how to bow. The tears stung before I could stop them. I tried to blink them away, but one slipped down my cheek. Daniel pulled me closer, letting my head rest on his shoulder. I'm so tired of feeling like everything depends on his approval, I whispered. He squeezed my hand. Then stop letting it. The words sounded so simple, but they carried weight. I thought about all the years my dad had set the terms. The college fund, the curfews, the silent punishments when I crossed him. My chest ached with the memory. Daniel shifted, opening the guitar case and pulling out the worn instrument. The wood was scratched, the strings dull, but when he strummed a chord, the sound filled the room, warm and imperfect. He began to play a melody I recognized, something he used to hum when we were teenagers sitting on the steps of his apartment building. I closed my eyes and listened. The music carried me back to summer nights when the world felt wide open before money and expectations twisted everything into bargains. When the last note faded, he set the guitar down and turned to me. Rachel, you know my parents wanted me to be an accountant. They told me music was a waste. I almost gave in, but if I had, I wouldn't be here, not like this. I studied his face, the quiet conviction in his eyes. And do you regret it? Not for a second. His certainty hit me harder than I expected. He had chosen his own path even when it meant disappointing his family. And he was still standing. He brushed a strand of hair from my face. You don't have to let him own your future. There are scholarships, jobs, other ways. You're not trapped unless you let yourself be. The thought of starting without that money scared me, but the idea of living forever under my dad's thumb scared me more. I leaned against Daniel and whispered, "What if I fail?" "Then you fail on your own terms," he said. "That's still better than succeeding on his." The room was quiet except for the sound of the refrigerator kicking on. My chest loosened just a little, as if his words had created space for me to breathe. We spent the rest of the afternoon cooking scrambled eggs and toast, with honey laughing when the bread burned and the smoke alarm chirped. For a few hours, the heaviness lifted. Later, when the dishes were stacked in the sink and the sky outside had turned dusky, Daniel pulled me close again. "You don't have to decide everything tonight. Just know you have me. No matter what." I rested my forehead against his. "Thank you." The moment stretched fragile and real until the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke it. I stiffened. Mom's headlights swept across the living room window. Daniel gave my hand one last squeeze. "You're not alone, remember that?" I nodded, and as he packed up his guitar and headed for the door, I felt the echo of his words settle inside me, firm and steady, refusing to be shaken. The phone rang just after 9 that night. I almost ignored it, expecting another round of messages from my dad, but when I saw the name on the screen, my stomach flipped. Aunt Diane. It had been months since we talked. She lived 3 hours away in Bend, and only came around for holidays when she felt obligated. I answered anyway. Her voice came through low and steady. "I heard about the dinner." I let out a humorless laugh. Word travels fast. She didn't laugh with me. "Your mother called and then your cousin texted me a photo. Empty chair at the center table. You didn't go." I sat on the edge of my bed, picking at the seam of my blanket. "No, I didn't." "Good," she said. "That must have taken courage." I felt my throat tighten. "Everyone else says it was selfish." "That is because everyone else is afraid of him," Diane said, without hesitation. "I know better." Her words dropped heavy into the silence between us. She went on softer now. "You know your father tried the same tricks on me when I was your age. Money, promises, threats. The day I told him I was moving out, he cut me off completely." I leaned against the headboard, heart pounding. I had heard whispers of her fallout with Dad, but never from her own lips. "How did you survive?" I asked quietly. "I worked," Diane said. "I took loans. I ate ramen for years. But it was mine, Rachel. Every single choice was mine." The line crackled faintly, her breathing steady on the other end. She continued. "Your father has spent his whole life measuring love by control. He thinks if he withholds, people will crawl back. You proved him wrong last night." Tears stung my eyes before I could blink them back. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like burning a bridge I can't rebuild. "Maybe that bridge needed to burn," Diane replied. "Sometimes freedom looks like ash at first." I closed my eyes, clutching the phone tighter. "Listen," she said, her tone shifting. "I'm driving to Eugene this weekend. Let me take you out. We'll talk more." A knot loosened in my chest. "I'd like that." When we hung up, I stayed there, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words. My dad had painted her as the family disappointment for years, the one who ran off, who never followed the rules. But her voice that night carried no regret, only strength. The next day, I met her at a diner off the interstate, a place with cracked leather booths and waitresses who called you honey. She slid into the booth across from me, wearing jeans and a windbreaker, her dark hair streaked with gray. She ordered coffee black and studied me with sharp, kind eyes. "You look tired," she said. I shrugged. "It's been a week." She stirred her coffee slowly. "Your mom told me he froze the college fund." Heat rose to my face. "Yes." Her jaw tightened. "That account was supposed to be for you, not his leverage." I fiddled with the sugar packets. "He says I'll get it if I apologize." "And will you?" she asked. I shook my head. "Number good," she said firmly. "Because if you give in now, he'll know exactly how to pull your strings for the rest of your life." The waitress dropped plates in front of us. "Pancakes for me ex vorher." Diane cut into hers with decisive strokes, like every movement was a choice she owned. I picked at my food, my voice small. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm being too stubborn." She set down her fork and leaned closer. "Rachel, you're not being stubborn. You're setting a boundary. There's a difference." Her words sank deep, carving space in me I didn't know I had. We ate in quiet for a few minutes before she spoke again. "Do you know why I never married?" I shook my head. "Because I never wanted to hand over my choices again. Not after your father tried to strip them from me." Her eyes glistened just slightly. "Don't let him convince you that obedience is the same as love." The diner buzzed around us, plates clattering, a baby crying somewhere near the door. I felt like the world kept moving while something inside me finally stilled. After breakfast, she walked me to my car. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and pressed it into my hand. It was the name of a lawyer she knew in Portland. "Just in case," she said. "If you ever need someone to look deeper into things." I tucked it into my bag, my heart heavy and hopeful all at once. On the drive home, the trees blurred past the window, rain streaking the glass. I thought of my dad's face, red with anger, his voice sharp with disappointment. And then I thought of Diane's calm and steady, a map of a different way to live. When I pulled into the driveway, the house stood quiet. I sat in the car a long time, fingers tapping the steering wheel, the papers still folded in my bag. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was beginning to plan. Grandma Evelyn's voice came back to me as clear as if she were sitting beside me. I could see her porch in Salem, the chipped white paint and the hanging baskets of geraniums. She had told me once, not long before she passed, that she wanted me to always know I had a place of my own. At the time, I thought she meant her kitchen table and the pie she set in front of me. Now, with Diane's words echoing in my mind, I wondered if she had meant something more. I went up to the attic after dinner, pushing aside boxes of old Christmas decorations until I found the cedar chest Grandma had given to my mother years ago. The lid creaked open and the smell of lavender sachets rose into the air. Inside were yellowed photographs, quilt squares, and a stack of envelopes tied with string. My hands shook as I untied the knot. Letters all in Grandma's handwriting. The first one I pulled out was dated 3 years before she died. It wasn't to me. It was to my mom, and in it, Grandma spoke of her house, the one in Salem, and her savings account. She wrote that she wanted me to have security, something that could never be taken away. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I pulled out another letter, this one addressed to me but never given. She wrote that she hoped one day I would be brave enough to live on my own terms, and that when I did, she wanted me to know she had left something behind for me. Tears blurred the ink as I read. Had my parents hidden this from me? Did they bury her intentions under paperwork and silence? The sound of the front door slamming jolted me. I shoved the letters back, closed the chest, and climbed down, just as my dad's voice boomed through the hall. "Rachel, come here." I froze at the top of the stairs. He stood in the entryway, his tie loosened, his face tight with anger. "Your absence the other night was a disgrace." I gripped the railing. "I am not sorry for missing it." His eyes narrowed. "You humiliated me in front of colleagues. Do you think that will go unpunished?" Mom hovered behind him, her hands twisting the dish towel, eyes pleading with me not to push further. I forced my voice to stay steady. "You punished me first. You froze my college fund." He stepped closer, his shadow stretching up the staircase. "That fund exists because of me. Without my discipline, you would have nothing. The weight of the letters in my pocket gave me courage." "That is not true. Grandma Evelyn wanted me to have something too." For the first time he blinked, caught off guard. Then his mouth hardened. "Don't bring her into this." But I already had. I turned and walked to my room, shutting the door behind me before his reply could cut deeper. I sat on my bed, pulling the letters out again. My chest rose and fell in quick breaths. She had wanted me to have security. She had wanted me to be free. The next morning I called Diane. My voice trembled as I told her about the letters. She was quiet for a long time before saying, "Rachel, that means there is a legal trail. If she wrote it, she likely filed something too." I swallowed hard. "What do I do?" "Meet with the lawyer I told you about. Bring the letters." I agreed, my hands still shaking as I hung up. At school that afternoon, I could barely focus. The halls buzzed with chatter about prom and graduation, but all I could hear was Grandma's steady voice, telling me I deserved dignity. When I got home, I tucked the letters carefully into a folder and slid it under my mattress. That night at dinner, my dad spoke of stocks and politics like nothing had happened, but his eyes flicked to me, sharp and warning. I ate in silence, the folder hidden safely upstairs, and thought about the house in Salem, about the possibility that I had a claim he could not erase. Later, as I lay awake listening to the rain tap against the window, I traced the edge of the folder with my fingertips. For the first time in years, I did not feel like a child trapped in his rules. I felt like someone holding a secret that could change everything. The following Monday, I caught the bus to downtown Portland with the folder pressed tight against my chest. The ride felt longer than it was, every stop stretching, as if the city itself was testing my resolve. I stared out the window at the rain-washed streets, watching people hurry beneath umbrellas, all of them living lives that had nothing to do with mine. The law office sat in an old brick building, with ivy creeping up the side. I hesitated at the glass door, my reflection pale and uncertain, then pushed it open. Inside smelled faintly of coffee and paper. A receptionist led me to a small conference room where the lawyer Diane had recommended waited. His name was Ethan Price, a man in his early 40s with kind eyes and a loosened tie. He shook my hand firmly. "Rachel Miller Wright. Diane spoke highly of you." I sat down and slid the folder across the table, my hands clammy. "These are letters from my grandmother. She passed 2 years ago. She mentioned leaving me something, but I don't think my parents told me everything." Ethan opened the folder, reading carefully, his brow furrowed, then smoothed. He nodded slowly. "These are significant. If she wrote her intentions clearly and also had a will or a trust, then you may have rights your father has tried to ignore." My throat tightened. So she really meant it. He looked up at me. "Words and letters carry weight, but what matters most is what was filed in probate court after her death. I can check the records in Marion County." I leaned forward. "And what about the college fund?" My dad froze it because I refused to apologize. His expression darkened. "A 529 account is meant for education. While the account owner controls distributions, using it as punishment can be challenged if it violates fiduciary responsibility." I swallowed hard, the words both frightening and freeing. "What happens if you find something in the probate records?" "Then we proceed," he said calmly. "We bring it into the open." For the first time, I felt like I wasn't screaming into the wind. Someone was listening, someone with the power to act. After the meeting, I stepped back into the drizzle, the city humming around me. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Dinner at 7, don't be late." I slipped the phone back into my pocket and kept walking, letting the cool rain hit my face. I thought about Grandma's neat handwriting, about the way Dad's face had flickered when I mentioned her name. The bus ride home felt different. I wasn't just Rachel, the daughter under his thumb. I was Rachel, who had placed evidence into the hands of a lawyer. When I walked through the front door, Dad sat in his chair watching the evening news. He didn't look at me, just said flatly, "You've been gone all day." I set my bag down. "I was in Portland." His head snapped toward me, eyes narrowing. "Doing what?" I held his gaze. "Visiting someone who might help me understand Grandma's wishes." The room went still. Mom, who was setting the table, dropped a spoon. Dad's jaw tightened, his face flushing red. "You're meddling in things you don't understand." I felt my pulse hammer but kept my voice steady. "Maybe I understand more than you think." He stood abruptly, the chair legs scraping the floor. "You will not drag outsiders into family matters." Mom stepped between us, her hands trembling. "Thomas, please." But his eyes were locked on me, blazing. "You are making a mistake you will regret." I lifted my chin. "Maybe, but maybe not." The silence stretched thick and dangerous. Then he turned sharply and stormed out of the room, the slam of his study door echoing through the house. Mom sank into a chair, her face pale. "Rachel, why would you do this?" "Because I need the truth," I whispered. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. That night, I lay awake, every sound of the house magnified. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the furnace, the faint click of Dad's footsteps pacing in his study. Fear pressed against me, but beneath it pulsed something steadier, stronger. The next day, Ethan called. His voice was calm, almost gentle. I pulled the probate file from Marion County. "Your grandmother's will clearly names you as the sole heir to her Salem property and a savings account of $20,000. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, my chest swelling. "She really did leave it for me." "Yes," he said. "Which means, if your father concealed this, that is a serious matter." I sat on the edge of my bed, the weight of the truth settling over me. I could almost hear Grandma's laugh, see her lifting that slice of peach pie toward me, telling me I deserved dignity. When the call ended, I stayed there, staring at the sunlight filtering through the curtains. Everything had shifted again. The secret was no longer just mine, it was real, documented, and powerful. I knew the next step would not be easy. Dad would fight, he would rage. But for the first time, I had something stronger than his threats. I had proof. The night of my father's birthday dinner arrived with the kind of chill that seeped through every window in the house. I sat on the edge of my bed, the folder of Grandma's letters tucked safely under my pillow. Downstairs, I could hear the muffled voices of my parents getting ready, the clatter of Mom's heels on the hardwood, the sound of Dad's low, commanding tone as he checked his watch. My phone buzzed with messages from cousins and aunts reminding me how important it was to be there. I set it face down, my chest tightening, but my resolve steady. The invitation had been clear. He wanted me to show up, smile, and pretend. But I had already chosen. Through the crack of my window, I could see the driveway lights flare as the car pulled out. The house sank into silence as their taillights disappeared down the street. My stomach fluttered with both fear and relief. I imagined the restaurant downtown, the Riverbend Steakhouse, glowing with polished wood and candlelight. My father's colleagues in suits, his friends with their wives in shimmering dresses. I could see the head table set for him, and the empty chair beside him where I was supposed to sit. Instead, I sat at my desk, opened Grandma's letters again, and read her words until they blurred. She had wanted me to know I was not alone, even if it felt like I was. An hour later, my phone buzzed again, this time with a photo sent by my cousin Jenna. It showed the long banquet table, everyone smiling, champagne glasses raised. In the center of it all was the empty chair, draped with a folded napkin. My name card sat untouched. My chest tightened, but then a second photo followed. This one wasn't from Jenna, it was from Aunt Diane. The picture was of her standing at the end of the table, her hand lifted mid-speech. Her text beneath it read, "They know why you're not there. I called her right away." The noise of the restaurant buzzed behind her voice. "I told them the truth, Rachel. I told them you were not here, because your father froze your college fund and tried to make your future conditional." My breath caught. What did they say? Silence for a moment, then Diane's steady reply. "Some are shocked. Some are embarrassed for him. But they know now." In the background, I heard the clinking of glasses, the shuffle of chairs. Then my father's voice roared, muffled but clear enough. His anger rolled through the phone like thunder. Diane whispered quickly, "He is furious. But hold your ground. This is your fight to win." When we hung up, I sat in the quiet, my heart racing. The image of that empty chair spread across the family chat, whispers rippling from table to table. The humiliation he had meant for me was shifting back onto him. Later that night, the front door slammed so hard the walls shook. I heard my father's heavy footsteps pounding the hallway. My bedroom door rattled under his fist. "Open this door, Rachel." I stayed still, my back pressed against the headboard, the folder clutched in my lap. When I didn't move, he shouted again, louder, each word sharp. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Do you have any idea what you've done?" My voice came out softer than his, but steady. "You did this to yourself." The silence on the other side of the door stretched long, broken only by his uneven breathing. Then his footsteps retreated, the slam of his study door echoing once more. I exhaled slowly, my hands trembling. The house fell into uneasy quiet. Mom didn't come to check on me. Maybe she couldn't. I lay awake for hours listening to the wind scrape tree branches against the siding. My phone buzzed again close to midnight. This time it was Sophie. She had seen the photos too. The text was short but fierce. "Proud of you. Don't let him break you." I pressed the phone to my chest, tears slipping hot and silent down my cheeks. Somewhere in that restaurant, my father's voice had boomed, his anger spilling across white tablecloths. And somewhere in the silence of my room, Grandma's words and Diane's courage steadied me. The next morning, I went downstairs. The kitchen was spotless, as if no one had eaten there in weeks. My father's briefcase sat by the door, his coat draped over it. He didn't look at me as he poured coffee. He said flatly, "You will regret last night." I pulled out a chair and Saturday maybe, but not as much as I would regret giving in. His eyes finally met mine, cold and sharp. "We'll see." He picked up his briefcase and left without another word. The sound of the door slamming shook the picture frames on the wall. I sat alone at the table, fingers wrapped around the edge, my heart pounding. I knew the battle was far from over, but for the first time he wasn't the only one with power in his hands. By the time Sunday rolled around, the whole town seemed to know about the birthday dinner. At church, people whispered behind hymn books, eyes sliding toward me and then away. I kept my head high, though every murmur felt like it burned against the back of my neck. Sophie sat beside me in the pew, her hand brushing mine, once a quiet reminder that I wasn't standing alone. After the service, Aunt Diane cornered me near the parking lot. She wore a dark coat and a look that could cut glass. "He is trying to spin the story," she said flatly. "He told people you've been rebellious for years and that he's only trying to keep you on track." I felt my jaw clench. And do they believe him? Some do, she admitted, but others saw the truth at that dinner. They saw the empty chair. The image haunted me, that napkin folded neatly where I should have been. It had made me look absent, but it had made him look desperate. That night at home, the air inside the house felt charged like before a storm. Dad sat at the head of the dining table, his hands folded as if he were about to deliver a verdict. Mom hovered near the sink, wringing her hands. Julia scrolled on her phone, pretending not to hear. "Sit down," he ordered. I stayed standing. "I don't need a lecture." His eyes narrowed. "You're 18. You live under my roof. You will listen." I forced my voice to stay steady. "I'm not a child anymore." He slammed his hand on the table, the sound making Julia flinch. "You embarrassed me in front of my boss. Do you realize the damage you've done to my reputation?" My breath came hard. "You did that yourself. You froze my future and thought no one would find out." His face reddened. "Where did you get that idea?" "From Grandma," I shot back. "She left me more than you wanted me to know." The room went dead quiet. Mom dropped the dish towel. Julia finally looked up. He leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "What have you been told?" "Enough," I answered. "Enough to know you've been hiding her wishes." He stood so fast his chair toppled backward. "You think some old letters give you power over me?" I didn't back away. Not just letters, records. For the first time I saw fear flicker in his eyes, quick as a shadow. Then it hardened into rage. He grabbed his coat and stormed out the door, slamming so hard the frame rattled. Julia blinked at me, her mouth half open. "Is this true? Did Grandma really leave you something?" I nodded, my throat tight. She frowned. "He always said everything went to Mom." I swallowed. He lied. Mom sank into a chair, her shoulders sagging. Her voice cracked. "Rachel, you don't know what you're stirring up." "I do," I said. "I'm stirring up the truth." She covered her face with her hands, whispering, "You don't understand what this will do to him." For a moment I almost felt pity. Then I remembered the text that froze my college fund, the humiliation he tried to force on me, the way he made me feel small for years. Whatever this did to him, he had brought it on himself. That week, the tension only deepened. At school, I overheard parents whispering in the hall, my name slipping through their conversations. At night, I lay awake listening for the creak of the stairs, afraid he might come storming into my room. On Wednesday, Diane called again. Her voice carried a sharp edge. "He's losing control of the story, Rachel. People are asking questions." I gripped the phone. "Good, but be careful," she warned. "When men like him lose control, they get dangerous." Her words stuck with me, heavy and real. Friday evening, I found a note slipped under my door. My father's handwriting, heavy and deliberate. It said, "You have one last chance. Be at dinner tomorrow night. Apologize. Get your fun back. Refuse and you lose everything." I crumpled the paper in my fist, my heart pounding. He still thought this was about money. He still thought I could be bought. I sat on my bed, the folded letters from Grandma spread across my lap. Her words glowed steady in the lamplight. She had wanted me to be free, not chained to his pride. As the night deepened and the house fell quiet, I tucked the letters back into their folder and slid them under my pillow. My father believed he still held all the cards, but for the first time in my life I knew he was wrong. Saturday morning arrived gray and damp, the kind of sky that pressed low and heavy, as if the air itself carried a warning. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee. I couldn't finish the folder of Grandma's letters tucked safely inside my backpack by the door. I was tired of hiding in corners. Today I would walk into the storm. Diane picked me up just before noon. She pulled into the driveway with her old blue sedan, the wipers squeaking across the glass. When I climbed in, she glanced at the bag at my feet. "You brought them, didn't you?" I nodded. Every page. Her grip on the wheel tightened. "Good. If he tries to twist this, we'll show him what real evidence looks like." The ride to her place was quiet except for the hum of the engine. My stomach churned, but my hands stayed steady in my lap. I wasn't the girl begging for scraps of approval anymore. I was someone walking into battle with truth on her side. Inside Diane's house, the air smelled of lemon polish and old books. She spread the letters out across the dining table, each one neatly dated and signed. She read them carefully, her lips pressed thin, shaking her head now and then. "Your grandmother knew what she wanted. This isn't vague, it's ironclad." I stared at the handwriting, the familiar slant of the words, and felt her presence settle over me like a hand on my shoulder. That afternoon, we drove downtown to meet with an attorney Diane trusted. His name was Mark Rivers, a calm man in his 50s with silver at his temples and a voice that carried no rush. He listened as I laid out everything from the frozen college fund to the letters and the threats. He didn't interrupt, just took notes and nodded. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Rachel, what your father did with the fund may fall under financial coercion. But these letters, if authenticated, prove your grandmother's intent. If your father misrepresented or concealed the estate, that's serious." My throat tightened. "Serious how?" "Fraud at best, theft at worst," he said. "And if he tried to manipulate you into forfeiting your rights with threats, that only strengthens your case?" I swallowed hard. I wasn't just fighting for tuition or for pride. I was fighting against a lie that had stolen years of my grandmother's legacy. Mark looked me in the eye. "You have options. We can file quietly, start a motion to unseal the probate records. Or if you're ready, we can make this public." I thought of my father's words, his threat written on that folded note. "Be at dinner, apologize, get your fund back." I thought of his smug certainty that no one would dare stand against him. I lifted my chin. "File it." Mark nodded once. "Then we'll start Monday. In the meantime, keep those letters safe." That evening, I returned home. The house buzzed with activity. Mom moved quickly through the kitchen, preparing trays of food for the dinner Dad had demanded. Julia sat at the counter, her eyes darting nervously between us. Dad wasn't there yet, but his presence filled the space like smoke. Mom glanced at me, her voice low. "Rachel, please just say what he wants tonight. It will be easier for everyone." I looked at her, my chest aching. "Easier for him, you mean? Not for me." Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. The guests began to arrive just after 6. Neighbors, family, friends, co-workers from the bank. They laughed too loudly in the living room, filling plates with appetizers, oblivious to the tension that strung through the house. I stayed near the doorway, my backpack strapped to my shoulders, feeling like an intruder in my own home. Then he walked in. Dad wore a pressed suit and the same cold smile he had worn at every community event, the one that fooled everyone except us. He shook hands, patted backs, accepted congratulations for a party I knew was just a stage for control. When his eyes found me, his smile thinned. He raised his glass in a mock salute and crossed the room. "Glad you came to your senses," he murmured. I met his gaze steadily. I didn't. His hand tightened around the stem of his glass. "We'll see about that." Dinner was served at 7 sharp. He sat at the head of the table, I at the far end. The room hummed with conversation, the clink of silverware, the forced cheer of a family pretending. I barely tasted the food. Every second ticked louder, the weight of what I carried pressing against my spine. Halfway through the meal, he cleared his throat. Everyone quieted instantly. I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate not only my birthday but my family's strength. He glanced at me, his eyes glinting, especially in times when certain people forget what respect looks like. The table murmured uncomfortably. Julia shifted in her seat. Mom stared down at her plate. My pulse hammered, but I rose to my feet. My voice came out steady. If we're talking about respect, maybe we should start with the truth. All eyes turned to me. My father's face went rigid. Sit down, Rachel. I shook my head. Grandma didn't want her house hidden. She didn't want her wishes twisted. I know what she left me. I have her letters. A gasp rippled down the table. Dad's glass slammed onto the wood, wine splashing. You don't know what you're talking about. I reached into my bag, pulled out the folder, and laid it flat on the tablecloth. His color drained. Diane, who had slipped in quietly earlier, spoke up from the corner. I've read them. They're real. The silence that followed was sharper than any shout. My father's chest rose and fell, fury written in every line of his body. He stood abruptly, towering over the table. This is family business. Not for company ears. But the company had already heard. Whispers swirled, eyes darted, forks clattered against plates. The performance was cracking, the mask slipping. I didn't flinch. Respect is earned, not demanded. And you lost mine the moment you tried to buy my silence with my own future. He stared at me, shaking his fist tight at his side. Then, without another word, he stormed out of the dining room. The door slammed in his wake, rattling the frames on the walls. The guests sat frozen, caught between politeness and shock. I gathered the letters calmly, slid them back into my bag, and turned to leave. My legs trembled, but my back stayed straight. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin. I drew a long breath and kept walking, the sound of muffled voices fading behind me. For once, it didn't matter what they said. At the end of the driveway, Diane was waiting by her car. She opened the passenger door without a word. As I slid in, the weight on my chest eased, replaced by something sharper, brighter. Not victory yet, but a step closer. We drove in silence, the headlights carving a path through the dark. My hands rested on the folder in my lap. Whatever storm was coming, I was no longer afraid of its thunder. I was ready to meet it head on. The morning after that dinner, I woke to the sound of rain tapping softly against my bedroom window. For the first time in weeks, I did not feel heavy. The folder of letters lay on my desk, where I had left it, a steady reminder that I was no longer powerless. My phone buzzed with unread messages, but I did not rush to check them. I brewed coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and let the quiet settle in my bones. By mid-afternoon, Diane called. Her voice carried a calm certainty that steadied me. Mark filed the paperwork this morning. It is official now. Your father will have to respond in court. I closed my eyes, gripping the mug. Thank you. She hesitated, then added, You need to know this will not be easy. He will fight, he always does. But this time he cannot bury the truth. I hung up, feeling both anxious and relieved. For once, the fight was not on his terms. That evening, Mom appeared at my door. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders drawn tight under a faded sweater. Can we talk? She asked. I stepped aside and let her in. She perched on the edge of the couch, twisting her wedding ring nervously. I did not know he would go that far, Rachel. I thought it was just about teaching you respect. I stared at her, my chest aching with old wounds. He froze, my future mom. He threatened me. That is not respect. That is control. Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. I know. I should have stood up sooner. I wanted to believe her. Part of me still longed for her protection, even after all the years of silence. But I also knew forgiveness would not erase the damage. Later that week, the court sent notice of the first hearing date. It would be held in the small courthouse downtown, the same place where Grandma had once settled property taxes with her careful handwriting. The irony was not lost on me. On the morning of the hearing, I wore a simple navy dress and carried the folder under my arm like a shield. Diane sat beside me in the wooden benches, her presence steady and unshaken. Across the aisle, my father stood tall in a dark suit, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. For once, his smile was gone. The judge reviewed the letters, her brow furrowed as she read the neat cursive on each page. After a long pause, she looked up. This evidence is clear. The property was intended for Rachel. Unless there is another valid document to counter it, the court recognizes these letters as proof of testamentary intent. My father shifted in his seat, his attorney whispering urgently, but there was nothing they could produce. The supposed will he had claimed existed was nowhere in the records, just as Ethan had discovered. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. The estate is restored to Rachel Miller. For a moment I could not breathe. It was over. My father rose abruptly, his face flushed with fury. He glared at me across the aisle, but I did not flinch. Diane touched my arm lightly. "You did it." Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp, the sky, a pale winter blue. I drew in a long breath and felt lighter than I had in years. The fight had not been just about money or property. It had been about reclaiming the part of myself I had been taught to suppress. In the days that followed, news of the ruling spread quietly through our family. Some relatives reached out with cautious support. Others stayed silent. Julia called one evening, her voice hushed. "I am sorry, Rachel. I see now what he did to you. I forgave her not because she deserved it, but because I did not want to carry bitterness any longer." When I finally walked through the door of Grandma's house in Eugene, the air smelled faintly of cedar and lavender. The quilt she had stitched still lay folded in the corner. I ran my hand over the worn wooden banister, feeling the years of fingerprints layered beneath mine. It was not just a house. It was proof that her love had not been erased, no matter how hard he had tried. I spent the afternoon opening windows, letting light flood the rooms that had sat too long in shadow. As the breeze drifted in, I felt her presence again, steady and unshaken. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun dip behind the trees. For once, the silence did not sting. It soothed. I thought of the girl I had been, the one who kept bending under the weight of someone else's rules, believing love had to be earned through obedience. I wanted to tell her she had always been enough, even without their approval. The battle with my father had changed me, but it had also freed me. I had learned that family does not mean silence in the face of wrong. It means accountability even when it hurts. I do not know if he will ever speak to me again. Maybe he will never forgive me for standing up to him. But I no longer live for his forgiveness. I live for the life I am building with my own hands. The storm had passed and I was still standing. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever faced a family battle that made you question your worth, I hope this reminded you that your voice matters. Share your thoughts in the comments. Let me know if you have ever stood up to something that felt impossible. And if you want to hear more stories like this, remember to like and subscribe so you will not miss what comes next.